Monday, they'll go out Tuesday, except that we'll have some in Havens, Wales,
That's
some
why I
in
was
Sunday.
shooting, that's why I was
Takes
shooting
more
for,
longer.
that's why I was shooting for Saturday.
Yeah. I don't see any way to do it on Saturday with Ruby and Dawn.
Well, consider you could have.
I can get the copies made, I'll have to go get labels in the morning from Office Depot.
We'll have to
Whatever's
find
down there.
somebody who can pull the stuff.
If I can get the labels done and the envelopes labeled, and the copies, I just need somebody to stuff them.
Are we using scanners?
Everything's a week, evidently he looked at it. And instead of icing over that
I'm
culture.
trying to hustle this thing, because I
Understand?
don't,
I understand.
we're already kind of very.
I mean, it would be too big. Yeah, and it's just you get tired of it. But by then, by then it was too late.
Yeah, all they got done.
Yeah.
They can do that, they can, you know, if I can get copies made, and I'll go get labels.
Every time you call.
I mean, as far as,
You have to listen.
You definitely don't want it in the mail before Saturday. Actually, you don't even want it in the mail Saturday, so you can take it in the mail if you want it later on Saturday, so they can't take it out, because you don't want it to be there until Sunday.
He's just sad.
no. You get the same printer I've got, so you can run it to color.
I've been looking.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything that's really grabbing me. Now, one of them.
We'll find out.
I understand, I've got this rock and hard feeling.
No, and I understand that. That's why, unfortunately, our time frame has not been good. We should have.
And you'll give me a second.
December.
Get that right.
I was just trying to hide the other thing.
Yeah, but it's water over the dam. Definitely. We'll have to chat with Don when he gets in, and then I will write the whole sign that. Fair enough.
Yeah, hi, Barry.
I bought it I needed flowers.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
She's running my social life. What is she?
Yeah, it was an introduction. Who asked for that?
Dottie, it was just practically nothing, because it was just an intro. Did you watch it?
Yeah, we watched it.
Okay. Yeah, there were.
Hello there, how you doing, guy? Bob?
We don't have time. I'm good.
Good.
Just one more.
Oh, maybe that's. Oh, and I need to send it to her home and let them.
I'm trying to look, I think she post office, being so rude.
Yeah, she's here.
I know she's here.
Yeah.
Save those from the box.
I don't know this stuff that comes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The house is empty, so now they did a showing today, the house is 2,000 people.
Yeah, we have more bed than
Because we sold so much furniture. So I was getting all ready, putting up my tables and all that kind of stuff for the sale. I take it all down in order to show the house. Luckily, I only put the tables in and I said, I'll let you know tomorrow. I've got 3 people coming to help me tomorrow. I will. But it's just funny
Staying on
because
throat?
I knew I was going to sell. Furniture, and people are going to think it's way too big.
Did you get your paper?
It is what it is.
I didn't ask whether you were, because I know you're never.
Well, sometimes when I'm sleeping, I'm okay, but not every time.
That's true.
And he doesn't sleep very well.
When the snoring starts, forget it.
Even with the CPAP sometimes.
And sometimes he was fighting with somebody the other night.
Was he winning though?
He thought he was.
If I have a
You
night,
got moved your
I had to move. You're right, I had to move.
we got a couple minutes, see where we're.
falling down the stairs, my kid didn't say the sense sometimes.
We got another bedroom, but.
Do you remember the morning?
Sometimes,
Sometimes I remember.
sometimes I wake up and
It's
go,
as big as a normal sofa, but it only.
I know, isn't
fits
that
two,
weird?
two sets
I
of
don't remember when you first wake up.
sometimes it has nothing to do with
I know.
really anything. You can make it.
And then sometimes it's just a little, it's just one little.
Most of my dreams is Kathy's.
Don't switch that.
Good answer, good answer.
Not a good answer. He can't speak about it.
Counting down,
Sometimes they're just weird. I mean, sometimes I have people in them that I haven't seen for
No,
years.
I had one experience, I forgot it. I thought, I haven't seen that person before, thought.
Yeah, exactly. That's, I'm going,
Yeah, we really don't.
if you insist. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cut 1, cut 2.
sometimes it's
Head down for 2. All righty, good.
from
All righty.
service. I mean, it might even be related to that. You know,
Downfield for the pass. We're missing a couple of people tonight. What is this?
Pastor,
Yeah, well, he's always late.
and are Don and Carol not coming?
I'm surprised if they're not. Lori? Have you heard about Don and Carol? Are they coming?
I haven't heard.
Okay.
Did Susan buy your shirt?
Why?
Of course,
Oh, they made
it's the right color.
Thank
No,
you,
is it?
Susan.
Why?
It's
She
purple,
answered.
it's purple.
doesn't say Michigan State on it.
It doesn't say Vikings on it either.
That's exactly right.
And I hope you have enjoyed this evening, and I'll see you next week.
Those that tease you love you.
I want to go back home.
Oh, goodness. Well, we're going to go digging into cross-cultural issues tonight. Anybody here been involved in a cross-cultural situation? Cross-cultural, yeah.
Well, every time you move to a different state.
Well, in some respects, you're right, yeah. Especially if you're heading from the north to the south.
13 months in the Philippines.
Ah. What did you learn about yourself in the midst of that?
That was TV. I was still learning.
Okay.
No,
Same issue in living in Turkey. I learned to keep my head down, is what I learned.
There you go.
I didn't have to do that. Except when we had the police there with their AK-47s.
So you were in the middle of a military situation there, yeah. What were you in, that's why you were in Turkey, yeah. How about cross-cultural that you were not in the military?
I worked down in extreme southern Texas for about 5-6 months.
That's
where I was
cross-cultural.
the only person who spoke English. That's true. Very true.
That's right,
Uh,
that's right.
That was a learning curve.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
In my law enforcement career, the county we lived in had multiple migrant camps.
yes,
That worked in the tomato fields, and
yes.
law enforcement is going to interact with those people on a regular basis, but it was always a challenge, basically a language challenge.
Yep, yep, yep. Church I pastored in Kokomo, we had a food pantry and a curling pantry. We provided food and clothing for half the migrant workers in that county. And that was a good experience for some of our people. They didn't know what to do for the first few weeks. And then after the first few weeks, they still didn't know what to do.
Was intimately involved with dealing with those folks, and then intimately involved with the Department of Immigration and dealing with those folks.
Yeah, different emphasis.
That was always an issue.
Yeah, yeah.
What are you
We've done over 80 countries in our travels, and some of them were English speaking, and it was not that big of a bridge. Others were not. I remember the times that we spent in Russia and in India, and that challenged us because that was true cross-cultural, different customs, different way of acting. It wasn't just a language issue. So, anywho.
Sounds like Don.
It sounds like Don to me. Yes, it is. Okay.
Company had asked me to go to, another country, Indian tribe, women were not accepted.
That's
I was
right.
supposed to go in and do computer software training, and I went, no, thank you, not gonna do it.
Oh, it would have been a great experience for you.
Not during wartime, there was a war going on when I was supposed to go.
Okay, okay.
I said, no.
All right. All right. Well, I understand that. Well, tonight we're going to really experience some cross-cultural issues because she's going to make it plain and simple that you're never going to understand the book of Ruth without starting to come to grips with cross-cultural, and it sometimes doesn't get more cross-cultural than that. So let's get underway. Ron? There you go.
So welcome back to the book of Ruth. We're in session 2 and we're dealing with getting past the Great Barrier. So where do we start this study? And the answer to that is exactly that we start with trying to get past the Great Barrier that stands between us and these fabulous characters of this wonderful little book. We need to take a step out of our world and step back into their world. And I've got to warn you that this is going to be a bit of a cross-cultural experience. The issue is we're going to have to recognize that our geography is not their geography, our history is not necessarily their history, and our culture is definitely not their culture. Now, reality is that the standard human condition is to assume that my culture is normative, right? The house that I grew up in, the food that I eat, the clothes that I wear, the schools that I went to, this is normal, right? And it's not until you get dropped into somebody else's culture that it starts dawning on you, oh my gosh, not everyone eats Cheerios for breakfast. There are some families out there that don't have curfews. There are some families out there that are still arranging marriages for their emerging adult children. For those of you who do business on foreign soil, or if you've ever been a member of the Peace Corps or gone on a missions trip, you've had this experience in spades, and you expected to have that experience. But let me warn you that you don't necessarily have to go on foreign soil to have a cross-cultural experience. In fact, you can have them right here on home soil. one of my funnest illustrations is when my family, native Northeasterners, you know, Boston, where the winters are cold and the people are colder. I can say that because I come from there. We decided to make the great cross-cultural journey to Madison, Mississippi, where the winters are warm and the people are warmer. Oh my gosh, in the Deep South, people talk to strangers. They do. Like, they'll stop right there to cross the street and they'll engage you in conversation. Not only will they engage you in conversation, which you would never do in Boston, they will touch you while they talk to you. And let me tell you, for the first few months when we moved down to Madison, Mississippi, I felt just a little bit stalked, actually, because these people were so friendly that I was a little overwhelmed. So their culture is not our culture. There are issues of the rules of social engagement, there's dress code, there's food. Let's talk about dress code for just a moment. You know that every self-respecting 5-year-old in Madison, Mississippi has enormous hair bows in every possible color. This is what you do. And the hair bows are as big as a salad plate, every one of them. In fact, one of our favorite things to watch is my youngest's videotape, there's an old word, of performing in her preschool concert. Because at no point could we actually see Elise's face because the child in front of her had, of course, her enormous matching hair bow. So dress codes are different. Food is different. We were kind of a fruit and fiber, you know, low cholesterol kind of family. Fried catfish, fried okra, fried pickles, and boiled peanuts, and crawfish boils, and shrimp and grits. If you have never had these foods, oh, are you missing out? Because what you will find very quickly when you move into somebody else's culture is that all of these culinary secrets have been kept from you all of these years. So we very quickly adapted, and thank God for our friendly neighbors who put up with us while we were in this transition. But reality is that right here on American soil, we were experiencing culture shock. And the reason we were experiencing culture shock is because of what the anthropologists will call ethnocentrism, which is this normative human posture. It's everywhere. It's not just white, it's not just Western, it's not just upper class. This normative human posture that my culture is the normal culture, and everyone else's world should look just like mine. Well, guys, that business of ethnocentrism is something we're going to have to get past as we step back into the study of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. And really, we're going to have to get past it in all of our biblical study, but this is a great place to start. We want to understand their world as their world. Yes, it is beautiful that we put our faces on the biblical characters. There's something really lovely about that. But in order to hear their story the way they're telling it, we're going to have to allow them to paint their own faces. And we're going to have to hear their story in their voices. In other words, we're going to need to realize that studying the Old Testament is indeed a cross-cultural endeavor. So for a moment, put your own culture aside, and for a moment, let's step into their world. Now we're going to do a little exercise in pulling off our own ethnocentrism. You ready? Take a look at this image. You've seen this guy before? Yeah? In fact, almost every one of you could identify him. Yeah? Who would you say he is? Yes, that is Jesus, indeed. In fact, that is the image of the Sacred Heart. It has been used for worship and for prayer for generations, especially within the Catholic Church. And everyone recognizes that as an image of the first century Galilean Jewish rabbi that we know as Jesus. But take a look at this guy. As you look at his image, you see the color of his hair. And the color of that hair, yeah, a little bit of light brown, some highlights mixed in. Take a look at the color of that skin. He is very fair-skinned enough that you might want to be thinking about a little sunblock before you step outside for your day at the pool, and the eyes. A beautiful kind of aquamarine blue. Yeah. And the palmolive soft hands. Okay. Take a look at this guy. Who would you identify him as? Same answer, same recognition. And it doesn't even matter what part of the planet you come from. You would look at that image and you would say, well, that's Jesus. But Jesus in this image has red hair. We have an Irish Jesus here. Okay? His skin, again, very fair, complected. So fair that this guy better not even collect his mail without SPF 15. Okay? He's got eyes that are a bright blue, and those hands, I don't think they have ever touched a sponge, let alone a hammer. Okay. As you look at those images, you see images of a character you recognize as Jesus. But you also recognize that this character is a pale, skinny, white guy. And you know enough about the story of the Bible, and you know enough about the story of Jesus to know that he was not a pale, skinny, white guy, right? What was his ethnicity? The man's Jewish. He's Semitic. That means the color of his skin should be olive. The color of his hair should be dark, perhaps even black. His eyes, they should be brown. And after 3 years of itinerant preaching in the Galilean sun, that man should be brown. And after being trained as the apprentice of a manual laborer, a contractor, he should be buff. We should not be having palmolive soft hands. We should not be having piano player fingers. We should be having calluses and scars and perhaps even a finger missing. So what is it that has made the Jesus of these images the pale, skinny, white guy? And the answer is ethnocentrism. He is being painted according to the image of the painter as opposed to the original image. Now, do I think it's a crime for us to put our faces on the biblical characters? No, not at all. I actually think there's something beautiful about it. But if you're truly going to understand the story of Ruth, you're going to need to do just a little better than that. And I'm going to help you with it. Let me show you some other images that I would call ethnocentric. I love this one. This one is coming from the Middle Ages. It is a picture of the disciples at the wedding at Cana of Galilee. And Johannes de Berkry is responsible for this one. Guys, that dress code would have gotten the disciples laughed out of their hometown. Not only are they seated on thrones with crowns, look at the clothing. This is so not Nazareth. Or take a look at this one. This one comes from Bright Hope Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this image is actually an image of an African-American Jesus. And Bright Hope Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is a thriving church that is putting the face of their congregation on the face of Jesus. How about this one? This comes from St. John's Episcopal, which is a church that I have ministered in several times. I love these people. In downtown Memphis. And back in the 1950s, an artist named Jean-Henri de Rosen actually visited their sanctuary and painted these beautiful murals of the biblical characters in Nordic fashion. So now we have a Viking Jesus. Notice that all of those characters are exceptionally tall, blonde, and absolutely, completely buff. So Jesus winds up blonde at his baptism, up close and personal, again, fair-skinned. This is clearly not the Jewish Jesus, but it's an ethnocentric presentation of Jesus. Here's one of my newer favorites. This one comes from the Cathedral of Cusco in Lima, Peru. And you look at that image and you recognize the characters. Okay, this is the Last Supper. That all makes sense to me. You see the disciples. But if you get up close and personal with this image, you're seeing some of the ethnocentrism built in. Because you're seeing that what they're feeding Jesus on the night of the Last Supper, their luxury item that needs to be offered to this hero of all heroes, is not the standard lamb of the Passover meal. Because, of course, this is a Passover meal, and there are rules about what you eat at Passover. And lamb is part of the rules. But these guys wanted to offer Jesus something that in their culture was extraordinary, was special. And that extraordinary little critter, if you look close at the plate, oh, that's no lamb. In fact, what you're looking at are these little guys.
Guinea pigs.
You're looking at guinea pigs. Okay, now in Lima, Peru, that's a delicacy. In my household, that's a pet. And in Jesus' household, that's verboten. Rabbis don't eat rodents, and they especially don't eat rodents for the Last Supper. These are fun presentations of how we tend in our ethnocentrism sometimes to lose the culture that we're trying to step into. So our job over the course of this study is to step over the line into Ruth's culture and to realize that in stepping over the line, what we're looking for is real people who lived in real places. They had their own culture, they had their own traditions, they had their own rules of social engagement that look a lot different from ours. And as we interact with the book, there are going to be incidents in this book that are going to kind of stun you because they're not part of your culture, but they are part of theirs. And one of the reasons when I teach my students, I emphasize this real people in real places is because that demonstrates the fact that these real people are engaging real faith. You see, as long as your biblical characters stay in their ivory tower, then there's no aspect of their exercise of their own faith that challenges you or me. Because they're ivory tower people. They're Superman, they're Captain America. They're perfect. Well, no, they're not. Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, real people, real places. And these are real crises that we're dealing with. Okay, so let's take our first step back into Ruth's culture. And one of the most important things you need to know about Ruth and Boaz's culture is that they actually come from a tribal society. And for most of us these days, a tribal society is something we hardly remember or perhaps have only encountered in movies. For Americans, if you were to think back to the Cherokee and the Sioux and the indigenous Americans that lived in tribal groups, okay, you're getting close. If you're from the Middle East and you're still dealing with the various constellations of the Muslim world and you're watching on the news perhaps one tribe throwing rocks at another tribe, okay, maybe you're getting close. Or if you're from certain parts of Africa, you're still dealing with the ethnic divisions of tribalism. But for most Westerners, this is pretty far away. Well, guys, tribal society is indeed what Ruth and Boaz's culture was. And what that means is that the family is the core of everything. Society is structured around the family in every expression. That means that economic opportunity and all vocational goals are actually structured by and happen through the family. That is not true for the standard Westerner. In fact, your vocation in the culture of Israel would be dictated by your father's vocation. You would have little choice in the matter. And moreover, your engagement of that vocation would be completely based on your birth order and your gender. This would be dictated from the moment you were born. If you're the firstborn, you are going to be your father's apprentice. You will always pull the densest workload. You will always be watched like a hawk. Your father will be all over you like white on rice from the day you utter your first word until the day you replace him as the patriarch of the clan. If you're second-born, the load is lighter. Third-born, fourth-born, fifth-born, just keep moving down the line until you're David and eighth-born. Well, first of all, by the time you're eighth-born, your inheritance fit in a backpack. And on top of that, the expectations that are placed on you will be equally light. Your gender, if you are male, your world goes this way. If you are female, your world goes this way. And that is the reality of society. What your father does is what you do, unless he, in his ultimate authority in the family, decides that he needs to apprentice you off to someone else, in other words, basically sell you into another service, or perhaps enlist you in the army. That's economic opportunity. What about law? It's also enforced by the family. There are no police forces in the land of Israel. You get in trouble, it is your dad who pulls you literally on the carpet. Spare the child, spare the rod, spoil the child. This is not a metaphor in the world of Israel. If your father can't control you, then your uncles will. And if your uncles can't control you, they will call the elders of the tribe. And the elders of the tribe will call you on the carpet. And if they can't control you, according to the book of Deuteronomy, the young, incorrigible young adult male who will not work and consumes the resources of the family without giving back, the community is called to stone him. Law happens within the family. This is why nothing in Israel's society is impersonal. And so too the safety nets of the society are not impersonal either. For the unemployed, for the accused, for the widow, for the orphan, the aid that is out there all comes through the family system. That's a tribal society. What about a bureaucratic society? Well, that's you, that's me. Society is structured around the state. Economic opportunities, they come through the state. Vocationally, supposedly, you can be whatever you want to be, as long as you get enough training to get there. Law, that's going to be enforced by the state as well. So if you wind up getting pulled over by one of Kentucky's finest because you're going 75 miles an hour down Harrodsburg Road, you can be sure that he's going to ask for your documentation that demonstrates that you're an upstanding citizen of the state, isn't he? And then if you can't produce that documentation, he's going to pull out his handcuffs and he's going to throw you in the car and he's going to take you down to the police station and make you appear before a judge. And let me tell you, none of those people are going to be related to you. And that's as it should be in a bureaucratic system. Law is enforced by the state. And what about safety nets? Well, in our bureaucratic society, there are a lot of safety nets. Yeah, there's unemployment, there's disability, there's Medicaid, Medicare, there's food stamps, there's foster homes, there's orphanages. These aren't all high-functioning safety nets, but they're all safety nets that come through the state. Whereas in Ruth and Boaz's world, the only safety net was the safety net of the family. So let's take a look at how that society is actually structured. What you're looking at right now is a chart of Israelite society and how it starts with a segment that's called the Beit Av. And really, that's their word for family. Beit Av is a Hebrew phrase, and it means the household of the father. Now, Israel's society is not only tribal, Israel's society is actually patriarchal. So it's a male-oriented tribal society. Now, we're not going to emulate their culture, but we need to understand their culture. So in this society, the core unit of the society was this extended family called the father's house. Now, for you and I, typically the core unit of the family is a husband, a wife, and 2.5 kids living in the burbs, right? That's the core unit of our society, not in Israel's society. It was a husband, his wife, his adult sons, their wives, and their children, all living on the family farm, all working as a unit to support the extended family. Hebrew doesn't even have a word for a family that is smaller than 3 generations, anywhere up to 20 members. Think about early farming families in the United States at the turn of the century, and how you would have the core farming couple in the main house with any underage children. The oldest would be married and have built his own house, perhaps on the back 10 acres, and he'd have his wife and a couple of toddlers. The second oldest maybe would still be in a trailer and just be married and no kids yet, and the youngest brother would still be living in the main house. That would be a picture of the Beit Av in Israel's history. That's their core piece. Now, after that core piece, when the Beit Av got too big to handle itself, it would split off. And the eldest sons of each family unit would take over their own Beit Av, father's household. That's where the word clan comes from. And typically a village in Israel's world would be about 200 people, that's all, 200, 250 people, and it would be made up of a sequence of clans. After the clan comes the tribe itself. You've heard about Israel having 12 tribes? Well, it's not a metaphor. They had 12 tribes. Yeah, they did. And each tribe had its own senior patriarch. And he was a very authoritative person. And then the 12 tribes, when they were all together, that's the nation. So this is Israel's world. And when we pick up the story of Ruth and Boaz, we're actually picking up this society before monarchy comes on the scene. So Israel is just the 12 tribes. And they're all living in their own territories under their own tribal authorities. They're all living in their little extended families, their little villages made up of clans. And they're all barely making it, which is going to become more and more important as we move through the story. So how are we going to describe Ruth and Boaz and Naomi's culture? We're going to learn 2 words. And you're going to work on this in your study guide so that this material is available to you. One of the words is patriarchal. One of them is patrilineal, and the other is patrilocal. And you can hear the word patra in all of those, because father, the oldest living male, is critical to Israel's society. Now again, we are not going to recreate this culture, because if we did, we're going to have to pick, even if we were, we're going to have to pick a phase of its development. But this is their world. We're stepping across the boundary. And in this world, the word patriarchal has to do with authority. And it's the idea that that oldest living male is not sent off to a nursing home, right? Rather, that oldest living male is actually running the household. And that patriarch is the center of the household. And all authority and all responsibility for the household actually rests on his shoulder. And if he's a good patriarch, he does not lay his head on the pillow at night until he knows that every member of his family is safe and fed and moving forward into their future. The second word we need to learn is the word patrilineal. And that word has to do with descent, ancestral descent or inheritance. And because this is a tribal culture, all of the resources of a family move to the next generation through the family system. You can't just sell stuff or give stuff away. We have been treasuring and saving this material for generations. We are going to pass it on to the next generation. And we're going to do it through the male line. Again, we're not emulating, we're just understanding. So the primary resource these people have in this particular phase of human history is land and children. I don't know about you, but in my world, my children are not exactly an economic asset. Are you with me? Yeah. When I'm done getting these 2 through school, through club soccer, through orthodontics, paying for college tuition, maybe a little bit of graduate school, American Eagle jeans, Ugg boots, and all the other stuff that goes into raising these children, I'm going to be in the poorhouse. They are not an asset. No. But in a farming community, they are labor. And so they are an asset. And land, of course. And this land cannot be sold in Israelites' culture. It has to be inherited. So these are the things that they are passing on, and we are going to bump into all of this in the story of Ruth. We're going to bump into something called the inalienable land law. That law cannot be sold. And rather, if a family member is forced to the margins economically, where they actually have to sell their land, it's a kinsman's responsibility to actually step in and buy their land back for them. This is going to become very important when we start talking about Elimelech and how he had to leave the family patrimony to go to Moab. Another law that protected these resources is something called the Levirate law. And this is the idea that if a woman is widowed before she has the chance to bear a son in this patriarchal culture, it is her brother-in-law's responsibility, this one's a little scary, to step in and actually get her pregnant in her deceased husband's name so that there's an heir to inherit the deceased husband's goods. This is going to become very important when Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah all lose their husbands. What is Israelite law? Now, you actually have already bumped into patrilinealism, you just probably didn't know it, and you bumped into it when you read your Bibles and couldn't find a woman's name in a genealogy. Have you ever wondered why everyone listed in the genealogies of the Bible are male? Is it because God is a misogynist? He hates women? He doesn't think they're important to the story? Heck no. It's because this is a patrilineal culture, and they're busy recording who's related to who so they know where the inheritance goes. And they're tracking it through the male line. We'll come back to that. All right, what about women in this society? Very important question for our larger story, because our heroes in the story are women. In fact, unbeknownst to you at this point, the true lead character of this story is Naomi. And according to the biblical narrator, she is both our hero and our victim. And it is her story that we are following as we see Ruth and Boaz playing as her counter characters. Well, a woman in this culture would be understood to be first her father's daughter, and she would be protected under the legal and economic protection of her patriarch, her father. So she would belong to a Beit Av. Then she would be married off, and she would leave the Beit Av, and she would join her husband's Beit Av, and she would become her husband's wife. And through her husband, she would have links to the economy and the legal system. Then, if all things went well, she would bear a son who would survive, which the mortality rate was quite high, and he would grow up to be a strapping young man who would protect her in her old age. This is how women moved through this society. This was normative. This is why your Old Testament says over and over and over again, protect and defend the widow and the orphan, because the widow and the orphan are the ones that fall outside the Beit Av. What happens when a woman loses her father before she has a husband? What happens when a woman who's already left her Beit Av loses her husband when she does not yet have a son? And the answer is, she's destitute. And so the widow in all of the Old Testament and all the way into the New Testament, if you've read James lately, is the one who needs the protection of the people of God the most. And of course, the story we're heading into is about two ultimate widows who have lost every connection to their Beit Av and every means of protection within their society. So the last business has to do with patrilocal, and that's the idea that the family unit and the living space is actually built around the oldest living male. So the Beit Av is not simply a family unit, it's actually a family compound. And in that family compound, we have a sequence of relatives, adults, middle emerging adults, adolescents, and small children who are all working their tails off simply to survive. This is a subsistence culture. It will stay a subsistence culture for eons, which means everybody is barely making it. And so they will collectively farm the land they jointly own, share the produce, and move on to the next generation. What did their living condition look like? Well, you're looking at an image on the screen of the typical family compound, where you've got 2 or 3 of these 4-room pillared houses. The women are up front and personal. You can see them taking care of domestic chores. They're grinding grain into flour, which could take hours and hours every day. They're weaving textiles into clothes. They're cooking the food. They've got the small children close. The men are out in the fields. They're keeping the sheep. They're farming the land. This is the Beit Av of Israel's culture. This is a world in which life was hard, survival was uncertain, and family was everything. Let me introduce one more term before we close down this session, and that is the term redemption, or the term to redeem. As you enter into the study, you're going to keep bumping into this word. Now, throughout your experience with your Bible, your church, if you have any background whatsoever, you have heard the word redeem before. And to you, it's probably become something I call Biblish, a word that's been used so often by the church in English that it's become gibberish. Well, guys, this word isn't gibberish, and this word wasn't born in the Bible. This word actually comes out of tribal law. It pre-existed your Old Testament. And the word has to do with the responsibility of a kinsman in this particular type of society to step up to the plate and be the safety net for his family member. A good patriarch, a real patriarch, stepped up to the plate. And if his family member had been shoved to the margins because of life circumstances and poverty, he put his checkbook on the counter and he said, "How much? That one belongs to me." Or if that patriarch was in a situation where a family member had been captured by an enemy and was a POW and their life was at risk, a good patriarch actually stepped up to the plate and said, "My life for his life. My weapon for your weapon. That one's mine, and I'll go down for him." That's what patriarchs do. That's what patriarchs are supposed to do. And what we're going to see in the story that's about to unfold is two of the most voiceless, two of the most marginalized of Israel's society. An old widow who cannot have another child, and a young widow who is a foreigner who has no child. And a man who is not the closest relative, but he's a relative all the same, who is willing in the midst of their crisis to step up to the plate and to say, "I'm a kinsman and I will redeem my resources, my home, my life for theirs." This is a story in the book of Ruth about redemption. Redemption that is going to become a core phrase throughout everything we know about our Bibles and the story, the great story of Jesus the Christ. Launch question for this session: turn to the person next to you and report to them one thing you learned about Israelite culture that rocked your world.
Well, now, by the way, as she was talking, I recalled being at 11,000 feet in Peru with Sue, and we were in the marketplace, and here was all these cages with guinea pigs, and she said, "Oh, aren't those cute little pets?" And the people that were with us said, "That's lunch." I never saw anybody get greener in my life. That was me that got green. Anyways. Why don't you tell me the one thing you learned about Israelite culture in this video that you found interesting? And we're going to go around the table because I'm tired of you people ducking. So let's go this way.
I guess the thing that just will always jump out at me about this story is that the brother-in-law had to father a child for a woman who had no children. Her husband died.
Next.
Well, just the way, the way that the families were together and how they had their certain positions, and that was it, that was their position, unless something changed and then somebody else's, another position or whatever. And I think we used to see, I think of my grandparents, and there was some of that, and my dad was from a big family, and, they all had their place.
So what do you do when she takes your thunder?
You just look at her and say, "I love you."
Say ditto and go on? But I will agree with something that she says. In my family, at least my father's side of the family, it was very obvious that my grandmother
grandfather was the patriarch of that family, and he was the one that taught us a lot about religion, the church, how it operates, how, the whole ball of iron. And of course, we would always go to their house after church on Sundays for a meal and sit down and talk about it, and I can still remember him saying, "Now, Bobby, this is the way this is," or whatever. And so this kind of reminded me of that, even though it wasn't as strict as that is, or as broad. But it kind of said my family kind of had a patriarchy too.
I guess the idea of the kinsman redeemer isn't something we have in our society. We're just gonna rush out and claim you quickly. Because we really need something.
I guess for me, it was how rigid society was. Absolutely rigid, kind of going on with what you said, you know your place and you will stay in your place. And if the law said this is what you will do, then that's what you do.
I have to agree with Sue. Wow. The women didn't have much of a choice. They had no say-so apparently. They just did what they had to do and some didn't, yeah.
I think that things are so different because you didn't really have the say on what you wanted to do for your vocation, especially if you were the oldest. That's very foreign to us today, I know for us, it was, you do your best, you finish school and think about what you want to do. So that was amazing to me. That kind of reminded me of the Mennonites. We came from an area where there were a lot of Amish and Mennonites.
Yeah.
And they rode the line, and if there were some that went away from that culture, then they really, they were not one part of the So it's just not what we have today as far as having choices and doing what you want, you feel you're gifted to do.
That's a good solid husband right there.
It just bugged me, being the oldest son, that I would have to be the one to do all that kind of work, and the guy 5 steps below got to mess around.
And take the back row there.
Well, I think that what surprised me was kind of what you mentioned right there at the beginning, was eating dogs. I couldn't believe that.
Well, the family situation, especially as the older son became the patriarch, reminded me a lot of the Amish community, which does the same thing, where once the elder son is married, before he's married, there's addition to the house that the mother and dad lived in, and that's for the mother and dad, because the son and his family now live in the larger portion of the house that they take care of the mom and dad.
And just the whole idea of a tribal society and the laws of a tribal society. And we look back at how we have our laws and how we live versus dad's gonna say everything and it's dad's law and we do as I say. And
But before they did much of anything, they had to go before the kinsman redeemer to get this all okay. For Boaz to inherit the land and marry Ruth, and it's like this. It's steps that you take to do, and we don't have to do that anymore. the Kingsman Redeemer plays a big part in this.
Yeah, but he will be a surprise before it's over.
Oh, okay.
It was not shocking or surprising, but it really tells us a story, a very short story, that a man has a responsibility of being the patriarch, and a woman has a responsibility to bear a son.
I was,
It's not her that decides
yes, Ron.
she has a son or daughter.
We have, Janice Blue wrote in, she said that what really stuck out to her was how birth order determined people's success. And my thought was similar to that in a sense, in that I thought it was interesting, I think it's interesting how it's an expectation that people give to the society, give to their family, to their tribe, to, you know, their immediate people, the people around them in the concentric circles.
Yep.
And as opposed to today, you know, like she said, your father will expect you to do the same job he does unless he determines otherwise for whatever reason. Whereas today we tell our kids, you know, you can be whatever you want to be, you know, follow your heart and do all these things. And not to say that having options is a bad thing. I'm not saying one's necessarily better than the other than follow your heart. But that was the societal expectation of the day, was for the families, the children, and all of that to actually put the family and the clan first.
I was born during World War II. And within several weeks of my birth, my dad shipped out. And so I have no remembrance of him as a small child. I was raised by my grandmother because my mother was working and Grandma would take care of me. And I spent 6 years in that environment. And when Dad came home, he was a foreigner. He didn't fit. And there was no way he was going to fit because those formative years were gone. I look back at this and say to myself, that's probably the foundation of my rebellious nature. I lived for me, chose for me, did what I pleased to do, and was lucky that I didn't end up in jail. And it wasn't until I met this woman that all of a sudden I found out that I should be living for more than just myself. Actually, it was her dad that straightened me out. Good old-fashioned farm dad.
Phil, would you say you were selfish?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I gauged what was important by what I wanted. You know, and fortunately I had some abilities and career-wise that I could do what I darn well pleased and had enough money to do it. You know, so I didn't get caught in that. But that is what eventually drove me to find something more than that, which is how I ended up in the church, etc.
You said that's when your father went off to the Civil War, right?
People reminded me about people like Bob. But anyways, I think you should start to grasp something that you're going to have to really get a hold of. And it's the issue of cross-culture. Going into a culture that you are not part of. That place at 11,000 feet in the mountains of Peru where they were eating guinea pigs was just one of many places we were that lived differently than we did. And I think we benefited from that because we saw that the cultures were so diverse and so different, and that we were just part of one culture, and there were so many. And I guess if we gather much out of this study besides the book of Ruth, I hope we gather the fact that this is a very rich world we live in. And the riches are not the riches of treasures, it's the riches of people and the cultures. And that's one of the things I think you're going to grab out of Ruth before it's over with, besides just the story. That there's not just one way to live, there's many ways to live. And it's going to be something that I hope we all hold on to. Richter talks about the word redemption having to do with the responsibility of kinsmen in the society that we're going to be talking about to step up to the plate and redeem members of the family. From your own experience, have you ever seen that happen in a family system or among people that you know? That someone was willing to step up and redeem somebody? Could be as simple as bailing them out of jail. Could be as simple as taking them into the house. Does any of that make sense to you? Have you experienced any of that?
I actually think two of my brothers did that in their marriages.
Yes,
They redeemed, in both cases, they redeemed someone who had had a less than desirable home life, and they were redeemed. And as Phil would tell you, when you married into the family, you were going to be prayed into the kingdom, because my mother and father wouldn't stop praying until you were redeemed by the blood of the Lamb.
So, by redemption or redeeming, you can say you really helped save someone else from a bad home, bad situation.
Yeah. But redemption is not only the redemption of out of bad situations. It's a redemption that brings us from one way of living to another. My family was pretty dysfunctional. I don't think I've told you before, but at the age of 15, I found myself in the basement of the Methodist church being baptized. Didn't mean a thing to me. And the reason I was being baptized is that the whole family had to be Christian because we were going to join the country club.
You were what?
Going to join the country club. Now, that's a point that we have to hold on to throughout this story, is that there's right reasons and wrong reasons for doing things. That was a wrong reason, pure and simple. It didn't hurt me any, but it did postpone, I think, my understanding that I needed to be baptized, really baptized. And it certainly informed me the day that I baptized my daughter in the Jordan River. There are things that we take for granted that are very, very important in our formation of our life.
We had the same situation because we took in our grandchildren and raised them in many years. And one of the gifts my grandson gave me is a plaque that says, "I am who I am because of you." You know, and they recognize that we did change their life for them.
What do you think is going to be the most challenging part of this study from the little bit you've already heard? Where are you going to get challenged in this, do you think? Haven't really got
Concept of family, and how the family interreacts and the interaction
And how many,
necessary.
and how many families are dysfunctional today. They're so dysfunctional when you look around other households. And in this story of Ruth, you don't have much choice. You do you do what is expected of you. You don't say, no, I'm not going, I mean, she didn't say, no, I won't marry Boaz.
No problem.
But you're right, they're not considered dysfunctional, and we would think it was dysfunctional today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Try it.
But that's the way it was.
Yeah.
But actually, Ruth was out of touch with the culture. She fought it.
Yeah.
And you're going to find out how much she really fought it if you haven't read it
Yeah,
before.
that's what I- she was a rebel, and she was,
Some
think,
relate.
just other things that I've read. It's just amazing that she had that strength to do what she had to do.
Was expected to do.
Yeah.
And that her daughter-in-law had the courage to follow her.
Yes.
Yes, she did. She
I mean,
said, no, I'm going.
So, ladies, when you think it's a male-dominated society, hang on, because you know doggone well it isn't. You're all in charge.
Behind every great man is a great woman.
Okay. Questions or comments? We're getting off. We're easing into this. Next week, we're going to take a real solid look on the geography and the economy and the society and what it looks like, and start to work on who Ruth was and how she got to where she is. Anything else you want to share this evening? And there he is.
Am I late?
Yeah. What can I say?
Only a child.
There you go. Well, that's Lori's son, so we'll have to forgive him.
Well, he saved me on Monday, so, I have nothing but good to say this week about it.
Okay, sounds good to me.
About Matthew. This week, yes. We'll wait till Sunday rolls around again.
Let's have a word of prayer, shall we?
First,
Yes, sir.
before we say goodnight, we need to sing happy birthday to a certain young man over here. Mr. Cunningham's birthday is today.
Oh, and you didn't bring a cake? Dolores.
Happy
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you. You want to share how old? I'm 80 right now. How about them apples?
80 today.
And you've got many more ahead of you.
We celebrate right on our way over here with that, something called the
Oh, I love it.
I didn't share.
Did she buy?
With that, let's pray. Father, I do thank you for the night. I thank you for the insights that we're starting to get about the culture that Ruth comes out of, about what's going on in the lives of the people there, and the recognition that what we think is normal life is only normal to us. There are so many other places of normality that things are done differently. I would just ask for your blessings upon us tonight as we go home, and I would ask that you would open up our hearts and our minds to study more about you and your children. In Christ's name, Father. Amen. And amen.